Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about accelerating Azure DevOps pipelines and Azure Platform as a Service with Octopus Deploy. I'm joined today by Azure MVP, also a Microsoft certified trainer, and a senior solutions architect at Intercept. Hello, Gregor, Suttie. How are you today?
Yeah, Derek, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm looking forward to talking about Octopus Deploy and Azure DevOps. So, yeah.
Me too.
So,
Me too. It's going to be a good one. It's going to be a
yeah.
good one. And it's funny because obviously both of us are actually we're about what 20 miles away from each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward to the second all Scottish Octopus Deploy webinar. Okay, so over to some housekeeping. You don't need to record anything today. A link of the recording will be emailed to you in the next few days. If you have any questions, we will have 10 minutes at the end of today's session where we'll be taking your questions and then answering them live. When you are putting your questions in, please put them into the Zoom Q&A. Don't One thing I did, just don't message the panelists. The main reason is it's difficult to track, and we like to answer as many questions as we can. So for those on YouTube, Twitch, etc., please, we will try and monitor your questions. However, you may be better jumping over to our community Slack. You can join on octopus.com/Slack and join the webinar channel. So, Gregor, what are we talking about today?
Yes. So we're talking about Octopus Deploy, and first of all, I'm going to talk about Azure DevOps.
You certainly will. You certainly will. Yeah. And one of the good things is, again, we've still got that 10 minutes at the end of today's session. Obviously, Gregor, you're going to be doing the Azure DevOps. I'll be doing the Octopus bit, and then obviously we can talk about platform as a service and all its wonderful benefits. So at
Indeed.
this point, it's over to you, Gregor.
Okay. Hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah,
So
see,
yeah,
see.
yeah. So this is Azure DevOps, and we're on the Octopus samples. Basically the Azure DevOps for Octopus Deploy. And today we're going to have a look at the Octo Pet Shop. So this is the overview screen for this project. And basically it is a solution that's made up of a web front end, product service, and a shopping cart service. And these three projects are all written in .NET Core. And we have a database project as the back end, which is using SQL. So we're going to deploy this. We're going to build this from the repos, and then we're going to build it and then push it to Octopus Deploy. So a wee quick run through of the major players in Azure DevOps. So we're currently looking at the overview screen, and under the overview screen, we also have dashboards and the wiki. So you can have dashboards inside your project, which will show things like the burn down chart, build history, build releases, project items, work items, all the kind of good stuff they work on during a kind of 2 week sprint. So that's kind of built up from widgets. You can have widgets on the screen in your dashboard for your project, and I'll give you a kind of welcome screen, and you can go in there every day and see what work's been assigned to you, what the build statuses are, things like that. So that's what the dashboards are for. Next up, we have the wiki. So the wiki is basically where you can store documentation for your project. It's a nice place it's a nice idea to have the documentation close to the code. So you can have things like the kind of the username and passwords. You can have things like documentation for how to go ahead and build the project. Give you a bit of documentation on what the project is. A nice place for new starters on the team who start working on this project to come and find information about the project. So that's a real quick introduction to the wiki. It's built in Markdown, but it's really quite nice. You can do things like build status badges and show all sorts of images and things like that. So it's really quite nice. And then we have boards. So boards is where you put your work items, as you can see here. You've got backlogs. So basically, you put all the work that you're going to be working on into the backlogs, and then you put that into a sprint, maybe a 2 week sprint, and you drag in the work that you're going to be working on for the 2 week sprint. So that's kind of like project management within Azure DevOps, and that's the boards. And below that is repos and pipelines. These are the two main players that we're going to talk about today. So inside repos, this is if I click on files, we can see the list of files for this solution. So we can see that we've basically got a database folder, some infrastructure, the product service and the product service tests, shopping cart service, and the web solutions and some scripts. So this is basically just a kind of window into the code. So you can see all the code that's in here that makes up the solution. And under files, we have commits. So you can go in and see who's committed and made what changes to these files. So here, for example, you can see that the last update was myself today at kind of 9 o'clock at night. And you can basically look at all the different changes that have been made by all the different people working on the project. You can also go in and see things like branches, how many branches are available within this repository. So you can see there's 4 branches in this one in particular. And you can also do things like tags. So you can tag releases, and you can also have a look at all the pull requests, which make up all the work that has been done on this project. So that's a quick intro to repos. The really most interesting part of Azure DevOps is the pipelines. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pipelines. So here you can see we have 2 pipelines. So we have the Auto Pet Shop kind of bog standard. It's actually the classic version of the release pipeline, sorry, the build pipeline, and we have the YAML version as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the Auto Pet Shop classic version. So this is the classic version, was the kind of first version that came into Azure DevOps before YAML was a thing. And if I click on edit here, let's go in and have a look at the actual pipeline. So the nice thing about the classic version here is you get icons and kind of like a graphical user interface for this pipeline. So this is what the pipeline looks like. This is the build pipeline. So you can see it's running on Windows 2019. We can see it's going off. First of all, it's going off to get the source. So what it's doing here is basically going off to the Azure repo. Go to the Git repo here. Go to this repository called Auto Pet Shop. It's going to the default branch, and that's basically that'll go and grab the code. And then we talk about the agent. So these steps here that we can see are all going to run on an agent. And let's talk about the steps individually. So first step it's going to do is it's going to run a .NET restore. So what that's actually going to do is basically restore all the NuGet packages for this for these solutions, which is quite nice. So it's going to go off to NuGet.org and basically pull down the solutions. So if you had to clone this repository from this repository and clone it locally, the first thing you would have to do before you build it is restore the NuGet packages. So that's the first step on the build server. In this case, it's going to restore the NuGet packages. And once it's done that, it's then going to build the project. So it's going to go off and build all the CS proj files, and then it's going to run any .NET Core tests that we have. And then what we do is we publish the database, the web project, the product API, and the product shopping cart service. And once we've published those 4 projects, what we need to do now is set up how we package it and push it to Octopus deploy. So this is an actual Octopus deploy task here that's written by Octopus deploy. So if I want to add this to my Azure DevOps, I'll have to go off and download this. So if we take a look at octopus.com/downloads, which is this website here, we can scroll down a little bit and you can see here that we have an Azure DevOps and TFS extension. So you can download that and install that, and you'll basically get this package step here that you can pull into your Azure DevOps build pipelines. And this is to show you how this talks to Octopus deploy. You have to look at the project settings. So if I look at project settings and then I go to service connections, so I need to set up an Azure. I need to set up a service connection between Azure DevOps and Octopus deploy, and we just use this the tool that we downloaded from this extension here. And once we install that, that allows Octopus deploy. Azure DevOps to talk to Octopus deploy. So that's kind of how that works. So let's go back and have a look at the pipeline again. Yeah, so let's just have a quick edit of that. So that's basically all the steps. So we're grabbing the code, we're restoring it, building it, testing it, publishing it, and then packaging it up and pushing it to Octopus deploy. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to basically kick this off just now. So let's go back to pipelines, and then I'll just kick this one off. Let's just do it from here, and I'll just run that pipeline. And while we're doing that, sorry.
The thing there as well is you can actually schedule it. So obviously, when you put in a new commit or you do a pull request, you can do approval there as well, and then obviously automatically actually kick off your build there. Is that correct, isn't it?
Yeah. So if we go back and have a really quick look at this, let's do this one, and then if we edit it again, a couple of other things to note. Yeah, so we
so we have it also has a concept of variables as well, so you can actually use, there is some crossover there between Octopus and Azure DevOps, and that, I think that's the benefit of it, is that you can pick which one works best for you.
Yeah, we don't actually have any variables in this one. So the variables we can either use, as you said, Azure DevOps, or you can store the variables in Octopus deploy, and I believe you're going to be showing that in a little bit. One other thing to note is triggers. So we have a continuous enable continuous integration checkbox that's ticked, and all that means is when someone commits a change to the code, it basically will kick off the build straight away. So if we go back to pipelines, we've kicked off the non-YAML version. So let's go ahead and now look at the exact same build, but this time within YAML. So let's just click on edit to edit this pipeline. Okay, so this is YAML, which stands for yet another markup language, which is quite an interesting and funny name, I think. What this is going to do is it's the exact same but in YAML. So we're going to do a trigger. So if there's any changes on the master branch, it's going to trigger this build pipeline. It's going to run on Windows 2019. It's basically got some variables that we saw earlier. It's going to look for a .sln file, and it's going to build this code in the build configuration of release. And then we're going to look at each individual step, the same as what we did before. We'll go to .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Test, and then publish. So we're going to basically publish the service API, the database, the shopping cart service, and the website as well. So this is just basically the YAML version of what we were looking at in the classic version of the pipeline.
I do love what YAML stands for. I did have a little joke. Honestly, when someone told me, I was like, surely not.
No, I know.
I googled it, and yeah.
Yep. Yeah, another markup language. It's quite an interesting name. So YAML is quite tricky. YAML can be a little bit of a steep learning curve. And the kind of things what I'm going to show you here is it has indentation rules. So if I, for example, tab over and basically click on something like inputs and then tab it over one space. See, there you go. It starts to go a bit haywire. It starts to start giving you intelligence that there's a bit of an issue here. So you have to be very careful with YAML, and that's the kind of learning curve for it. You have to make sure that it's all lined up, or it doesn't like it at all. There is some IntelliSense as well.
I think that's the thing though for me is I love YAML, but I also dislike it extremely as well. I think the thing is it a frustrating process? Yes, it can be, but what you get at the end of it is something that's super powerful and reusable. Because that's the thing is, once you've got a .NET Core build, quite often they look all fairly similar. So that's that. I think that's where the value really comes. Yes, it can be painful, but you can also export it, and because that I don't know about you, Gregor, but often what I do is I do something manually. In this instance, I like the classic editor, particularly during troubleshooting. And then I export it as YAML, and hey, you know what? It works. Yes, it's. I find it. I find that a lot of people take that approach.
Yeah, no, definitely, I do it as well. So if I'm struggling with trying to do the YAML syntax, you can actually go into the classic pipeline, click on a task, and show view YAML, and it'll give you the YAML, and then you just paste that in. which is really nice. The other thing to point out is there's tasks over here. So if you want to add a task, say you wanted to do archive files, you can go down, put space in, and then just click on archive files. For example, fill in the parameters and click add, and I'll add it over here for you. Which is quite nice. I'm not going to change the YAML, so we'll just leave it as is.
Yeah.
So that's the YAML version of the pipeline. Okay, so let's go and just check how. Let's just leave that. I'm not going to actually change it. Let's go back and see our pipeline. So our pipeline has ran. Okay, so that's basically that ran. Let's now go and take a look at releases. So that's just the build pipeline. Let's go and look at the release pipeline. Okay, so we can see that it's basically started. So that was the one we kicked off earlier on while we were talking about the YAML. So let's go into this one. Go on and edit it. So again, this is the classic version of the releases. So we have our artifacts. So basically, when you do the build will output an artifact. It's usually like a zip file and a drop folder. It's just kind of the convention that Azure DevOps follows. And we basically pick up the artifact, which is the zip file. And then we have this concept of stages. So what are the environments that you want to deploy to? So in our case, we've got dev, test, and we've also got a production one, which we'll show in a bit. But so these are the three. It's going to create the release, it's going to deploy to dev, and then it's going to deploy to test. So these are very, very simple. And again, it's set up with continuous. So if we click on here, we've got the continuous deployment trigger. So the minute a build has done, it's going to kick off the release and basically run these steps. Yeah. So we can also look at, see if there's any variables. Don't have any variables. You can look at things like retention. Do you want to keep the builds for a certain length of time? That kind of thing. So let's just go off, and what we'll do is we'll kick off a release. In fact, this release is already done. So what we've done here is we've created a release, we've deployed it to dev, which is succeeded, and we're currently deploying to test. Okay, so at this point, we want to switch over to Octopus deploy.
Okay. What I'll do now is I'll take it from here, Gregor. So as you can see on screen, it's funny because you're talking about it and I can actually see it on my screen as it's deploying Octo Pet Shop. So let's jump in. So this is Octopus Deploy. What you've got down here is the projects. That projects tend to be things that are shipped at the same time. And then you've got some environments across the top here. So you've got your development, your test, your production environment. So in this instance, Octo Pet Shop consists of the website, the shopping cart service, and the product service. So what you can see here is this is just your deployment process. And as you said earlier on, Gregor, is you've done the deployment to dev and test. So that's great. You know, obviously you can see here that this is working. And one thing I really love about Octopus is Runbooks. Runbooks came out last year, early last year actually. And coming from an ops background, I honestly love Runbooks. The main reason is they can do so many things. You know, one of the things that I've done in the past is actually fixed the octopus.com by using a monitoring runbook that automatically fixed it as well. In this instance, I got a create infrastructure and a destroy infrastructure. So for those in the UK, this is my Blue Peter moment. So I have already went ahead and created development and test. So let's jump over to the infrastructure tab. And then what you can see here is if you jump into deployment targets, you can actually see all your deployment targets. So what you've got is your development, and then you get test, and then each one is tagged with the Octo Pet Shop product service, and then the shopping cart service, and lastly, Octo Pet Shop web. So what I'm going to just do just now is actually start it by running a runbook. The main reason why what you've got is three Azure web apps that all sit in the same Azure app service plan. And then these are all underpinned by a Microsoft SQL Server, which is actually running as platform as a service. And I'll talk you through how you can do this. But let's start by creating some infrastructure. So let's select run. What you've seen here is that we've already got development test. So let's spin up some bits for production. Here we go. So whilst this is happening, I'm going to jump back and actually talk you through the runbook. Okay, so let's go to create infrastructure. And let's have a look at the process. So what we've got here is a 13-step runbook process. It's probably quite, it's quite large. And if you are familiar with our deployment processes, they do look very, very similar. So what we've got is we're creating a resource group. A resource group is like a logical unit in where you store your infrastructure within Azure. I don't know about you, Gregor, but I honestly love resource groups. How do you set up your resource groups? Do you find that you have resource groups, lots of resource groups, or do you contain things like environments, etc., in your resource group?
We try and do like rg-dev-project name, rg-production-project name, that kind of thing. So we've got a naming convention. Sometimes it changes depending on which project, but we try and keep it rg-environment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have a customer name, sometimes we don't.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's funny. I actually use Octopus here to have a naming convention, and I will show you how to do that. It is variables. So as you can see on screen, we've just got some PowerShell. All this is doing is just running through a try, catch, and if statement, and then creating a resource group if it doesn't exist. Then we've got the Azure SQL Server. So one thing just to be aware of is obviously, again, this is ARM. With Azure SQL, it is platform as a service. So you provision your database server, much like you would on premise. The only difference is you don't have to provision the operating system and then configure SQL for, 30 days. So like that, the thing I love about it is, I've been there in the past and had to rack servers and, and it's very cold and then you have to install the operating system. Often it's a hypervisor. And then if you're really old like me, you would actually talk to VMware and they would say, no, you can't virtualize SQL servers. Obviously, that's changed days. That was a long time ago. So there's lots of control here. And the thing is you can literally spin it up in seconds. In this instance, what we've got is we've obviously got our ARM template. We are using variables. I use variables for it as much as I can because I'm lazy and I really like this. And one of the things that I love about Runbooks and the variable side of things is you can actually you reuse the same variables. So your variables for your runbooks are the same variables as they are for your deployment process. So in this instance, I'm using a runbook, a variable for the Azure account. This is actually an Azure library variable set. And then what you'll find down here is we're then using different variables. And one of the benefits is you can also you can create your ARM template, and most of these generally again are created by creating them manually, and then basically deleting the bits that don't work. And hopefully at the end, you've got a working PaaS. So yeah, and you see here, we've got this all here, and so you're creating the MS SQL server. One thing just to be aware of is when you come in, you'll see that the next step, so we're on step 2, the next one is there's a little sign here. And one thing just to think about when you're spinning up your infrastructure is look at parallelism. So within Octopus, you could, for instance, I could create all of those 13 steps, run them all parallel, and then everything would come crumbling down. The main reason is that you can't run everything in parallel. Unfortunately, you need the resource group to be created before you can then deploy an Azure SQL Server to it. And then, for instance, you need the SQL Server to then do the database. So this is something just to factor in. The next few steps are fairly similar. The only one that is different is this the app service plan. Gregor, what is an app service plan versus a web app?
Yeah, good question. So when I basically the app service plan is where you host your web apps. So when you go into Azure and you're deploying web apps or function apps, for example, you have to basically create an app service plan first. So I always think of it a bit like the host for your web apps. So you go in and create your app service plan, and then you host your websites and your Azure functions and things like and your mobile apps within um, your Azure plan, service plan. So
That's
you're
right.
actually paying for the service plan. Under the covers, it's running on virtual machines.
It's funny, and that's the thing with ARM though, is it can be hundreds and hundreds of page lines, or it could also just be 37, which is also nice as well. Again, you'll see that I've got heavy usage, and one thing just to be aware of, this has been hosted on webinar.octopus.app. This is something that you'll be able to access after the webinar. This is in the Azure space, so it's just something to be aware of. It isn't public just now, but you can come in and you'll be able to use this code, the setup. You will actually even be able to clone it if you wish. If you do have any questions, just get in touch with advice@octopus.com. So next, we've created that service plan, and then what I'm now doing is I'm now creating the actual product service. So again, very similar, using the Azure service principle here, and then using some names for your web app. So jump in and see edit source code. And one thing that also you can do is you'll notice earlier on, Gregor, when you actually had your pipelines in your YAML, you could actually also store this in your package as well. So you have your database package, so you could also have your ARM template and have source control and all that good stuff as well. So that's definitely something to be aware of. And then the next few steps are very similar. The main thing that we are then doing is now that we have a product service, we need to register it. In this instance, this is just something that what you can do is just you'll see here. This is just some nice PowerShell. I won't lie, I did not write this PowerShell. This is far too nicely done. But what I'm effectively doing is I've just created the infrastructure in Azure. What I'm now doing is I need to actually, from within Octopus, get the Azure infrastructure back into Octopus so that Octopus knows about it and also can then run health checks. So that's something just to be aware of. It's coming back. And one thing like this, because when you're using deployment processes or runbooks, nothing can be deployed to without a health check. So the next step is also doing a health check. So this is a built-in step, and that's just something to be aware of. What we've got here is we are just basically we are just doing a health check. Once it's passed the health check, then effectively what can happen is you can then use it in a deployment. So just something to be aware of. For that, you would to enable it for a specific environment, you can come in to you can actually come into the infrastructure and then come into environment. And one thing, so for instance, you may find that in production you don't like dynamic infrastructure. So if you select edit, you can actually select it here as well. So in production, you can actually have, so obviously dynamic infrastructure. So that's just something to be aware of. So let's go back and let's discard those changes. And then what we should see now is we should see that we have production. Oh, it's still going. It's still going. Let's go. Let's see how long it's got. Honestly, there's no smoke and mirrors here. This is all live.
So Derek, you're actually doing infrastructure as code using Octopus Deploy here.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I obviously I'm slightly biased in that I work with Octopus, but I also love it in that it makes my life much easier. So yeah, I'm doing as you probably noticed that I'm doing as much as I
Yeah.
can do within Octopus. So yeah, you can. That's the benefit of Runbooks. And one of the good things as well is you can also do things like emergency and routine operations. So it's not just infrastructure as code, but running backups, things like that. There's lots of
Yeah.
stuff, and we've got lots of information on our website as well. So there we go. And one thing that I said is obviously I did say I would show you. I did say I would show you the naming convention. So just let's jump on over. Actually, let's go to the deployment process. One of the things that I want to do is I actually want to deploy it to production. So we'll select deploy. And there we go. Off we go. So with what as you've created the release, you've then deployed the release to dev and test, and then what you're seeing just now is on screen is the manual intervention step. So if you notice, but this didn't actually trigger in dev and test, because let's be honest, do you really want to have approvals on dev and test? Could you imagine, no one's really having a good time. I can't imagine ever having some, so unless it's like a highly regulated thing. Um, what about you, Gregor?
No, I agree. Dev and test, no. So I'm a big fan of automatically deploying to dev and test, and having manual intervention before we go to production is definitely a good thing to have.
Yeah, sometimes it just you need to have a little think. So there we go. We can see that the production is now deploying. So like I said earlier on, you can use variables, and one of the things that you can also use is library sets. So what we've got here is your standard variables. You'll notice here that I've got a naming convention. I like to use project for the project level variables. It makes it much easier to track to where that's coming from. If you see the library sets, what I've also got is a global library variable set and an Azure one. So what I'm actually doing with the global one is I'm actually using this. So for instance, I'm using the variable from the Azure side of things. So that's, if it goes to dev, it uses the dev account, different subscription, etc. Obviously, you get some things like locations, you get network stacks. I don't know about you, but I don't tend to change my networking on Azure all that much.
No,
I
good idea
tend
not to.
it's the one thing I don't generally include in the resource group. Is VNets generally have their own dedicated resource group. So yeah, and then what we've got down here now is global as well. So for instance, in global we set things like the um, API key for the server, the infrastructure account. You can see here. So this is a sensitive variable. There's some resource group for DNS. This is actually from a previous talk that I was doing where I can do an automatic failover using Azure DNS just by using the CLI. And obviously that's one of the things here is you're seeing here that I've deployed Azure Platform as a Service as code. Um, but that's one of the things that you can do so much more. And one of the things I do like about variables is things like naming conventions. And just to come on over, this is definitely one that I prepared earlier as well. You'll see here is we've got Azure dash Octopet shop dash development. And if you see, is we're in the Azure space. You come into the dashboard, you'll see that it's Octo Pet Shop. And then lastly, you'll see there's development. So that's how I like to do it. Where possible, automate it, standardize it, and you can use system variables because one of the things here that I'm using is the system variable for the space name, the system variable for the project name, and then the system variable for the project environment name. So let's jump in. So we've probably had some deployments. Let's actually see if these things work. So yeah, what we've got here is the task log. I like this step because what we're actually doing is we're just verifying the deployment happened. Let's go back to, so that's dev. And then let's jump on over to test. And you can
So
see here that dev is actually spinning up.
you're deploying these web apps into one app service plan, is that correct?
That is correct. So these are actually all under one. It's a bit like Toys R Us, all
Yeah.
under one roof. So
So
yeah.
what some people don't realize in Azure that you actually just pay for the app service plan. So you can install 50 to 100 to 200 web apps within this app service plan, and all you pay for is the app service plan costs, which is quite nice.
And one of the things I like about it as well is you can actually get free ones as well.
Mhm.
So there is actually free one. Like there's certainly there's a limitation on the compute and the power, but
Yeah.
if you did want to do, you could definitely take advantage of that as well. That's one of the benefits I like about app services. They're so cheap to run.
Mhm.
So what we've got now is, well, lastly we've got deployment to production. The one thing that I really like about this is I just like clicking. It puts out the URL. I think it's mostly because I'm a little bit lazy, but I do like that. So you can see here. So we've got test. So this ties in earlier on with the naming convention. So that's working on test. Honestly, no smoke and mirrors. You can buy some octopuses or octopods, and then some dogs. I won't lie. I think I would have 1,000 dogs if they all cost $100, and my two dogs would not be happy. And then so what we've got here, that's dev as well. We've got a website running. And then lastly, we have production. So that's one of the benefits here. And do you know what? It's funny. I actually haven't showed you the deployment process yet, Gregor.
No.
Um, I think that's the good. That's why I love Runbooks. Is you can really dive in and do so many cool things with them. And this is the deployment process. So Octopus, you set the deployment process a single time, and then from there, you can reuse it into all your environments. So what we've got here is this is the manual intervention step. You can just scope that to a specific step. So there's a few options here. You can scope it to production. I see this all the time. If you did, honestly, if you do want to get to that point where everything that you check in and build goes to production, that's where to be. Um, so you can then at that point actually remove the manual intervention, and then it'll just automatically deploy. And one thing just to be aware of is you can actually run a run book from within a deployment process. Often, what I see with dev and test is, dev and test, you have to pay for them for 365 days of the year, 24 hours a day. And what you could do is insert a run book at the beginning and scope it just to development, and then kick off your infrastructure being deployed, and then automatically deploy the code as well. I see that quite a lot. And then at the end, you maybe want to put a manual intervention and then your destroy step.
Mm.
So that's definitely something to consider.
That sounds good, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it is nifty. It is nifty. It's sometimes a little bit of it's a complex explanation sometimes, but honestly, you can use the run book step. That's a lot of runs, but you can do that to do it, and then don't have it for production because you probably, well, unless you're doing something like blue green, you probably don't want to create new production and then destroy it at the end. You're going to have some unhappy users. So what we've got here is deploy an Azure web app. This is very straightforward. All we're doing here is running, so obviously you've just spun up the web app. At this point, we're then passing in the web app. That's a lot of webs again. And then yeah, so there's a few things just to consider here as well. When you're doing your deployment, think about what you want to do with existing code. Be it a staging slot or blue green deployments. Lots of things here to consider. But where possible, I would always generally start with a new web app, or at least purge your previous one. It's a bit like what you were saying earlier on, Gregor, where you see false negatives, false
Mm.
positives,
Yeah.
without having a clean build.
Always good advice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And then lastly, what we've got here is we're just deploying the database. Very straightforward. We're just deploying a package that's actually sitting on a worker, and then from there, that's actually then doing the deployment to the Azure SQL Server. But yeah, so that's basically the end. But I do just want to just obviously take a quick moment, and have a look again at that variable screen. Honestly, it is something that's super powerful. There's lots and lots of things that you can do. I actually have variables within variables. You've got, the connection string, which then contains the database server SQTN as a variable, and then the database, then the user ID, and then yeah. So there's lots of cool stuff you can do. So you can, bring that variable within variable to get a nicer experience. And one thing that I definitely would say is let's just have a look. Get used to using this. What I found with Azure is most things are in lowercase, and you also don't want spaces or any illegal characters. How do you go about doing that, Gregor?
Similar. Yeah. So always tips to recommend is basically strip out any dodgy characters. Try and keep spaces to a minimum. In fact, I don't try and have any. and lowercase ever, just in case you're ever deploying to Linux, for example, which is case sensitive and doesn't like funny characters. So yeah, what you're doing there is spot on.
No,
So yeah.
that's it. I think that's the thing, and obviously, so we've shown here that you've got ARM templates. You can use PowerShell. Obviously, can you talk us through some of the other languages that you can use to deploy infrastructure within
Yeah,
Azure?
you've got lots of options. So there's some popular ones. Pulumi and Terraform are quite popular. Most people get started with ARM templates and then, to be honest, gets quite scared with looking at ARM templates. ARM templates are pretty verbose and pretty complicated to look at. I actually use Azure PowerShell with some Azure CLI. So you have some Azure CLI wrapped in actual PowerShell. So I use the PowerShell for the kind of error handling and kind of writing nice colors of green for green is good and red for errors, that kind of output from the build. So we have a PowerShell script, and inside that we have Azure CLI. Now, the reason why we do that is Azure CLI is really straightforward and nice to read. Yeah, I think anyone could look at an Azure CLI PowerShell script and work out what it's doing. But you've got Terraform, Pulumi, Azure CLI. You could even run Bash scripts in the or PowerShell scripts in the Azure Cloud Shell. Multiple options. Just go. I tend to, yeah, I always go for what's the most common skill set in the team. So if people don't know Terraform, then I wouldn't use Terraform. If people are happy using PowerShell, then go for PowerShell. I don't have any particular preference other than I don't really like ARM templates, so I try and steer clear of, of writing ARM templates. One quick tip is if you create the resource in Azure, you can go to resources.explorer.azure.com and it will actually give you you can actually go and see all of the ARM templates for all of your resources. So that's quite useful. Quite handy, but yeah.
How I do it.
Yeah.
I often go in, create it manually, export it, and then bring it in, and then kind of like play about with it.
Yeah. What's interesting about that is though it doesn't actually always work.
Yeah.
It's got to be careful.
To be honest, it's a bit like the YAML one when you use Azure DevOps as well. It does take a, you do need to go in and change it and fix it.
Yeah.
Because that's how I've done it. It's things like the type of server it's going to run on. And it's funny, I often actually host my own build agent as well, just to avoid that queue. So if you are using Azure DevOps, you can actually host your own agent, and then that is your agent. So that's something to consider as well.
One thing I did forget is the new project from Microsoft called Azure Bicep. And that's kind of like a transpiler. So it's the same sort of idea as Terraform, but you basically write scripts in usually Visual Studio Code, and you can create modular scripts. So you can make reuse. So basically you could create a storage account using Bicep, create that snippet, and then reuse that again and again and again. So it's kind of getting away from writing raw ARM templates. You can use a thing called Bicep. So please do take a look at that as well.
I won't lie, I'm very excited. I haven't used it yet in anger, but definitely want to check that.
Yeah.
Well, that's the end of today's demo. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm just going to have a quick look at the questions. Okay, so Gregor, I've got a question from James. James is asking, what are the pros and cons for using Octopus versus Azure DevOps? What I think might be an idea is I'll give you my take, and then obviously if you want to offer any input.
Yeah.
I think for me, one of the key bits is the dashboard. I really like Azure DevOps. I love pipelines. I love the repo side of things. The one thing that I struggle with is once you go past a few projects, I really struggle with permissions, seeing exactly where is what, I just want to kind of grab that. And I generally find that that's where Octopus really does come into its own. Obviously you've got a configurable dashboard. You can, you can put people into spaces, project groups, etc. And it's generally just a little bit more dynamic. I obviously am a little bit biased. Obviously, I've been using Octopus since 2012. So obviously there's definitely a preference. What's your thoughts on that?
I would definitely say Octopus Deploy has a better UI, especially for when I think back on a customer that we used to work with. They had 27 microservices. So you imagine this view that you're showing here. We've got 27 Octo pet shops, right? So we've got 27 different microservices. all with different versions, all in different environments. To do that in Azure DevOps, I don't really think it's got a view or a screen that kind of shows you all of your projects like that. Octopus Deploy does, so that's definitely one plus point for Octopus for there. And I also think permissions and users in Azure DevOps is a little bit funky. I never really understand how it works, to be honest. Usually end up making a group and throwing everyone in the group. I think Octopus Deploy is a lot better at looking after permissions and kind of storing things like projects and structure. It's better at structure than Azure DevOps.
I think as well, see when you were saying about the 20 microservices, one feature that pops into mind is multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is a way for you to, actually, I think I've got, let me just go over to the samples instance. I've got a better example here. But effectively what you can do is have a single deployment process with Octopus. So those 27 microservices, I could probably guess, right, that sorry, I've lost my train of thought. But yeah, basically the deployment process would likely be very similar. You're probably deploying the web service. There'll probably some peripheral bits that you need to do, and I think here we go, tenants. So this one isn't actually a very good demo, if I'm being honest, but effectively what you can do is, think Octo Pet Shop, but in this instance, this is Pet Clinic. And then what you could effectively have is actually 27 different microservices that are using the same deployment processes with, steps scoped slightly differently as well. Whereas I don't really think multi-tenancy as a concept within Azure DevOps is something that that does scale very well.
Yeah, it's that you would just really struggle in Azure DevOps to show which version of each microservice was in which environment. That's just not a thing you can do, I don't think.
No, it's a really good question though. Robert is asking, what's your favorite feature in Azure DevOps?
What's my favorite feature? I actually like what do I like? I actually like the wiki and believe it or not, the dashboards. I like the dashboards because, in fact, I like both because you can basically run a project from the one tool. So we can run a whole project from Azure DevOps. So the documentation for the project that you're working on is next to where the code and the build and the releases is. So yeah, I like that feature. I also like the dashboards where you have all the widgets, so I can come in the start of the morning and basically see what's what, see if the builds are failing, if the builds are passing. I can see how much work I've got left, what's the status of the burn down chart, and all that kind of good stuff. So I actually quite like that feature. I think it's just a nice view into the bit of work and the project you're working on.
Do you know what? It's funny you should say that. See, obviously we're talking about that. I think that's where sometimes definitely Azure DevOps has some really strong features there. I'm a big fan of obviously writing everything in Markdown, and what you can do is you can actually, for instance, same idea. One thing that I do is in my runbooks, I like normally to create Markdown, which I haven't done in this one. So let's jump on over Windows. This is one again, this is my Blue Peter moment for those in the UK. So if you come in, one of the, is you can write some really nice notes here as well within Octopus. But yeah, definitely that feature where you can actually have a wiki spin up as well.
Yeah, the main reason why I like it is if imagine you're working on a team of say 10 people and 2 people start in your team, they've got one place to go and read the documentation on what does the project do, how does it work, what's the deployment process, where's the code, you know what I mean? It's all in the one tool. So that's probably my favorite feature.
I love it. So someone's asked what my favorite feature, favorite feature of Octopus is, and it's Runbooks. I come from an operations background. I love deployment processes, but Runbooks for me, for running things like infrastructure as code, emergency tasks, maintenance, Windows backups, SQL backups, Windows updates. I actually use Runbooks to automate parts of my home. I won't lie. So yeah, I'm still trying to figure out how to use Runbooks to automate turning on my coffee machine in the morning. But yeah, if I'll let you know if that works, then obviously I'll definitely let you know about it as well.
Sounds good.
Okay. So actually, what's coming up with Azure DevOps?
So with Azure DevOps, yeah, good one. You can show the the roadmap ahead. Sorry. So there's some pretty cool new features coming up. The one thing that I'm quite interested in is the one that's kind of second from the bottom, conversion from classic build pipelines to YAML pipelines. Looking forward to that. So a lot of people in the past set up their Azure DevOps before YAML was a thing within Azure DevOps. They used the classic build pipeline, which is what we demoed, and they haven't moved it over to YAML yet because sometimes it's a bit of an effort. So it'd be nice to have a tool to be able to do that for us. So you can now take each task and grab the YAML and move it over, like what we showed, but it'd be nice to take the whole build pipeline and just grab it and move it from classic to YAML.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think there's a lot of power here, which is good. And we have a question from Tom. Tom is asking, does Azure DevOps have a way to scope variables like Octopus does? Like, so, scope them to runbooks, environments, all that sort of good stuff.
It does. It's not quite Runbooks, but you can scope it to environments. Yeah, so you've got within like your build or your release, you can scope variables as well. Yeah, so if you go to summary, yep, and then go to your build pipeline, yep, and then if you go to edit that.
One thing I have noticed is that you don't use dark mode. Why not, Gregor?
What you mean when you're demoing or in general?
Just every time.
Dark mode. I like dark mode. I must admit, I like dark mode. So if you go into variables, yeah, you can add a variable and there's variable groups. So you can do you can manage variable groups and you can basically, this is just going to take you to documentation, but you can basically set up sort of the same things. You can have variables and variable groups. So you can do the same sort of things. Yeah, you can also have environments as well. So you can set up variables for production, dev, or whatever stages you have set up. So yes, you can do that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm just going to have a quick look on YouTube. Nothing on YouTube. Yeah, we've got. Yeah, okay. And yeah, I think that's all the questions I can see. Let's have a quick look at the Octopus roadmap. So just something to be aware of. We've got some really cool stuff coming out. In actual fact, in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing a release webinar where we're going to be we're actually demoing our new project export between spaces. So if you are using cloud or on-premise, you'll be able to move back and forth. And the one thing that I am really looking forward to is config as code. That should be in early access in the next few months. And the cool thing here is obviously in your demo, you showed how you can commit your Azure DevOps pipeline to that. You're actually going to be able to create your Octopus deployment process as code, and then you will actually be able to use it and check it into GitHub, and then make your amendments either on code line or also in the user interface, depending on what you're working on. We do have some bits as well coming with GitHub Actions, some really good stuff. And could you use Octopus Deploy for creating a new dedicated customer instance for a SaaS solution running on Azure PaaS? That's a great question. So an example here is customer A signs up for a SaaS service. So you deploy an instance for customer A. The answer to that is yes. The main reason I say that is how we deploy Octopus Cloud. We use Octopus to deploy Octopus. We use Octopus, Terraform, some Kubernetes, and then some SQL bits. But yeah, so what you could do there is actually use that multi-tenanted application. And that's what we do. So whenever you spin up, like for instance, one thing just to be aware of is this instance, webinar.octopus.app. This is actually, you'll be able to log into this and see the Azure one after the webinar. You can't just now because I've opened it up in the past and people go in and start clicking about and it slows down. So I didn't want to affect the demo. However, what you could do is actually have a single project or multiple projects and actually use multi-tenancy to do things like spinning up your Azure SQL Server. Then, for instance, it may be your container, and then obviously doing that. So yeah, you'll see that quite a lot of things over the last 3 years that we have released have actually been down to our new SaaS product, Octopus Cloud, and some of the requirements that we had internally. Because we initially launched on AWS using virtual machines, and then about 18 months ago, we relaunched it on Azure using platform as a service to run everything for Octopus Cloud.
That's interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, it is. Honestly, I go in and it is what some of the guys do with it is it's really impressive. Right. Well, unfortunately, that's the end of today's webinar. So I just want to say thank you so much to Gregor. Gregor, I really enjoyed working with you on this. I thought that was a really great demo as well.
Thank you. I enjoyed it myself. It's good. Yeah. Very interesting.
Awesome. And what I now want to do is just thank you for everyone for attending. It does look like there was some Zoom issues. Hopefully most of you jumped over to YouTube. Everything there seems to be a little bit better. I am really sorry about that. It is something that we'll look to improve. But yeah, so a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you. So if it's not been great, if you're using Zoom, we'll email you a link to YouTube and it should be better. We do have some upcoming events. So on June 2nd, 3rd, and the 7th, I'm back with Adam Close, and we're doing a release webinar talking about all the cool new stuff in 2021.1, and we'll also cover 2020.6 as well. And then I'm back again with Adam on the 16th, 17th, and 21st. And we're going to actually be taking the new Octopus Linux container, which has just had the early access preview wrapper taken off of it. And we're going to be running it locally. And then hopefully, all going well, I'll be able to take that and then deploy it to Azure Kubernetes service as well. So if you're really if you're interested in watching me fumble about doing some deployments to AKS, please do sign up for that. And you can sign up for that on octopus.com/events. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I hope you learned something today, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, folks.
Bye.